So this is going to be quick, and do not expect to have, by the end of this 5 minutes, mastered Whitehead's technical jargon here, but I wanted to use this illustration to introduce you to some of his concepts here. These are some daffodils, and I'm going to explain the process of concrescence to you. Concrescence is Whitehead's term for how creativity or infinite productivity becomes a finite product. Concrescence is that process whereby the infinite becomes finite, but only for a moment, because the finite entity which has concressed immediately perishes back into this dim background from out of which we arise and perish. So if we turn these daffodils on their side, we can use them to illustrate concrescence, which Whitehead defines as, in terms of this, I think, almost magical formula. Concrescence is the process whereby the many become one and are increased by one. What does that mean? Well, the many are perished objects in the past environment. So the daffodils here are, let's say, an actual occasion of experience, right? And each actual occasion of experience begins by inheriting perished objects in its past environment. Now, in addition to the past environment, Whitehead also had this realm of what he called eternal objects. These are like Platonic forms, but unlike Plato's forms, Whitehead didn't privilege this realm of eternal objects as the preeminent actualities, right? For Plato, the forms were the most real things that there were, and the actual world was a pale imitation. Whitehead totally inverts that picture. These eternal objects for Whitehead become deficient in actuality, he says. They're pure potentials, but they long for actualization. And they're pure potentials so that they provide the different forms of definiteness that become actual in an actual occasion of experience. So colors, shapes, sounds, they're sort of like the adjectives that characterize our experience. And so every actual occasion has these two poles to it, a physical pole and a mental pole, right? And so everything down to subatomic particles and the most trivial puff of existence in far off empty space, up to each moment of our conscious human experience, is an actual occasion which has a physical pole and a mental pole, though for very simple occasions like those associated with photons or protons or subatomic particles, these occasions are mostly dominated by their physical pole, right? Which is to say that they're repeating what has occurred in their past without much innovation. Now, an occasion inherits its past via what Whitehead calls a prehension. And a prehension is a feeling, right? Prehensions are the process whereby the past is allowed, the objectified past, right? The perished past is allowed entry again into the present to be felt by this concressing occasion of experience. Now, eternal objects are not, you could say they're prehended, they're conceptual prehensions, but Whitehead also has a term for this called ingression. So these pure potentials ingress into the mental pole of an occasion to allow this occasion to, again, characterize what it has inherited from its past environment. Now, without the ingression of eternal objects to provide an actual occasion with some novelty, some alternative ways of characterizing what it is inheriting from its past, then there would only be repetition, right, in each of these occasions of experience. And so the ingression of eternal objects provides some source of novelty in the mental pole of an occasion so that it can innovate upon what it is inheriting from its past. But again, simpler forms of experience, say in the inorganic world, they don't ingress much novelty. They mostly repeat the past, right? It's only more complex living organisms and multicellular animals like mammals and primates and humans who can ingress these pure potentials so as to, really radically shift from what we inherit from the past and do something totally new, almost free, we might say. Freedom, something like freedom seems to become possible in human beings. We don't just have to repeat the past anymore. But again, the inorganic world does mostly repeat the prehensions of its past, which is why physics can develop such reliable, lawful descriptions of what happens in the inorganic world, whereas it's very difficult to predict how a human being will behave in a new situation. But even us, we still have some degree of habituality, right, in our behavior, but nonetheless, we ingress these pure potentials and are capable of quite a bit of novelty. Now, this term subjective form is Whitehead's way of talking about the emotional quality that a occasion experiences as it begins to inherit its past. How does it feel about that past, right? That's the subjective form. And then the subjective aim is how, in the process of concressing, the various prehensions of the past are led to grow together, and any conflict between them, between the feelings of the past, is brought into contrast, Whitehead says, and harmonized like notes in a chord that is struck. And so the subjective aim allows the many of the past to grow together into a new one, right? And achieve satisfaction as this new subject, which for Whitehead, as soon as that new subjective point of view is achieved, it perishes, right? And becomes a superject. And this superject is a subject's way of persisting into the future, of gifting itself and the value that it has realized in its process of concrescence to the future, so that it, becoming a part of the universe again, can be taken up by the next moment of concrescence, right? So the last thing I want to say about this is, if we think about it at the level of our own psychology as human beings, this process of concrescence is meant to apply at multiple levels, right? It applies at the simplest level of a wavelength of light and electromagnetic propagation, as it does to our stream of consciousness, for we psychologically complex human beings. And what Whitehead is suggesting in our case is the reverse of the Cartesian understanding, where Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am," right? Which implies that there's an already existing subject, me, who has experiences, right? Or has thoughts. And these thoughts sort of, they qualify my substantial self. But my substantial self, the subject that I am, pre-exists my experiences of objects in the environment, and sort of persists as the same entity throughout my life. Whitehead is saying that actually, in each moment of my experience, a new subject is emerging. And rather than a pre-existing subject having experience of objects, in Whitehead's universe, the perished objects of the past are growing together and being concressed into a new subject. So a new subject grows out of the perished objects of the past, allowing the past, which is finished and perished, right, to move again into the future through the present. And so each present moment of our subjective experience is the result of the growing together of these objects. And so Whitehead says, he says, no thinker thinks twice, right? And if you're familiar with the first process philosopher Heraclitus, he says, you can't step into the same river twice. Well, Whitehead is extending this principle of process philosophy into our own conscious experience. No thinker thinks twice, or we could say no subject experiences twice, right? Because each moment, the subjective perspective that we are is arising out of our environment, experiencing itself as a new perspective, enjoying that perspective, and then that perspective perishes. and becomes an object for the next moment to inherit. And so in Whitehead's view, my identity, my personality, my sense of flow of consciousness is actually a whole series of these actual occasions, a historical root, he says, of these occasions, which are, in the case of my own consciousness, intimately related to one another in a way that, my historical root is not as intimately woven together as with your historical root. And so we each have our own sort of flow of consciousness because we each are composed of a distinct chain of actual occasions, which are inheriting from one another. And so a human soul, in Whitehead's view, becomes something that needs to be understood as a sort of pulsing process of becoming, right? Rather than a substantial ego, as it was in Descartes' view. We're more of a process, right? And we are a process that is constantly enfolding the environment into us, right? And so we're not separate from the environment. We are the environment coming to take a subjective perspective upon itself. It's a radically different view of who and what we are from the typical Cartesian perspective. So I will stop with that. I'm sure I'm sure your heads are spinning. That's a good thing. This is a very novel perspective on reality. And so if you're not confused, then you probably didn't hear me. But I'm happy to discuss this with you and answer some of your questions. So thanks for your attention.